The time is 7:32, and I call this meeting of the Town Council to order. Before we move on to the meat of our meeting, I wanted to share some comments that I have prepared. So forgive me, I will be reading. I want to start by saying that I've really enjoyed being the mayor. It's challenged me in ways that I had forgotten that I could be challenged, and it's helped me to remember that I can be thoughtful and not off the cuff and deliberate and do all these great things that I'd forgotten about, just making popsicles. and so I really appreciate that. I thank you that you have put your trust in me to have this role. And I want to thank you all for being engaged on the small stuff and the big stuff. The small stuff, I'm excited to say that the birthday pencils that we ordered have arrived, and we will soon be asking kids of all ages to come up, see the town office and meet us and get a birthday pencil from the town of Garrett Park and see what this crazy government stuff is all about. And also the big stuff, like updating our ordinances or hiring members of our staff or maintaining our buildings. These are important things for us to discuss. And I want to make sure that we have productive and useful dialogue. One thing that concerns me, though, is that listservs aren't really the best medium for discussing broad and complex issues. And I need to address that. There have been some, frankly, untrue claims on the town listserv in the last few days. One particularly egregiously untrue is that we want to demolish the building. We want to demolish town hall. Let me be clear. Town hall will not be demolished. There is not a single person who is responsible for making decisions about renovating town hall that has ever said a single word about wanting to demolish town hall. It is not going to happen. But the other piece about that, the conversation that's going on, the listserv about town hall, is that there's opposition to even consider creative solutions to the problems that town hall faces. We're several steps away from discussing what innovation should look like. And right now, all we're asking preservation architects to bid on the opportunity to create concepts. We aren't spending any money at this point. No money's changing hands. And we won't spend any money until after bids are returned and after we've chosen a firm. This is probably not going to happen in this calendar year. We're several months away, many months away from having concepts available for the town to consider. And when the time is right, we will absolutely have many opportunities to debate the merits of those options. Kind of the best opportunity, or the best analogy I can think of, is applying to college. It seems vogue these days for high school students to apply to a dozen colleges, and pretty typical for them to pick at least one or two that's a stretch, that's a little out of their reach. And it's not because they think that's probably where they'll end up, but it's because they don't want to regret not trying for maybe a dream school or for not thinking outside the box. So here's what I'm asking. Don't shoot down ideas just because they're unfamiliar. Don't try to shame fellow residents for wanting the opportunity to imagine and discuss a different way of preserving Garrett Park. So I want to be clear. I'm not going to engage in debates on the town listservs. I don't think it's productive. I don't think it's appropriate, especially or even when there are lies. And that was really hard today, actually, I've got to say. It was really hard to not take my little fingers to the keyboard and say, this is not true, this is not true. But it's just not productive for me to respond to some of the things that are going on. My experience is that when anyone questions the status quo, they are opened up to mean and unproductive attacks. That's not conducive to a good dialogue. And in fact, it's a big part of why I chose to leave the council in 2018. I challenged some conventional wisdom and asked questions that I guess didn't want to be asked. And I was actually called dumb and dangerous by a longtime resident. That's completely unacceptable. It's not okay. And it's a tone that seems to be creeping back into our town dialogue, and I don't want to be a part of it. But I recognize that residents have questions, they have concerns. And so I plan to establish a regular set of opportunities. I guess it'll kind of be like office hours in college, where I'll answer questions that I can, I'll listen. And if I don't have answers, or if what I say isn't satisfactory, I will do my best to find an answer that is satisfactory. I'm also going to try to talk council members into setting aside an additional evening each month so that we can have work sessions, so that we can have open debates about things and not fill up time during these Monday night meetings with debate, but rather with action. And we have a different opportunity to make sure that we debate issues appropriately. So I ask you to email me and we can set up a time to talk. But as for the listserv, it's not where I think that we should have productive conversations. So anyway, that's my little spiel. It's 7:38, and wanted to see if there are any additions, corrections, or modifications to the agenda for tonight's meetings. Okay, not hearing any. We will approve the agenda without objection. The approval of the minutes. We have minutes from the July 11th council meeting and also from the August 31st special council meeting. Any changes or corrections to those minutes? Okay, okay, thank you. Without objection, we're going to approve the minutes. Next, let's call on presentations by residents. My understanding is that Carolyn Schallaker is interested in making a presentation. I would ask that she unmute herself and show video so that we can hear from her. And please start with your name and address. Carolyn, you there? All right, we'll come back to Carolyn in a moment, I guess. Anybody else like to make a presentation? Okay, Barb, you okay with putting this on ice for a moment, and if Carolyn chimes in? Okay, so let's do that. Time is 7:40, and we're going to move on to action items, starting with Town Manager Matthews. You can take the lead on this, please.
Thank you. Ordinance number 2022-4 is being presented tonight for introduction by the Town Council. The proposed ordinance would amend several sections of the Town Code that address enforcement matters. More specifically, the proposed ordinance would specify who is liable with regard to a violation, and that language can be found in section 107A of the ordinance. Establishing a default fine amount, which is addressed in the proposed language for section 107C of the draft language for the code. It would also allow the town the option of prosecuting misdemeanors as a municipal infraction, and that language is in section 107D. The ordinance would declare that a violation of a stop work order is an infraction, and that is in section 401, subsection B, subsection 1, subsection D. Allow the town to recoup the cost of any court action, including reasonable attorney's fees, and that language is in proposed new section 910A. And lastly, it would allow the town to abate a violation and to recoup its cost for doing so. And that provision is in section 910, subsection B. In preparing the ordinance, the town attorney noted language that was redundant of other code sections. The proposed ordinance before you this evening proposes to remove the redundant language for the sake of streamlining the code as well as for clarity. The town attorney also removed language that conflicts with other code sections in one instance. The proposed code change that seems to have generated the most interest among community members is the language that is included in proposed section 910B, which would allow the town to abate a violation and recoup its cost for doing so if the responsible party fails to address the problem after receiving notice of the violation. One of the questions that came up, I think, on the town forum was a concern, I guess, that we were creating an entirely new class of violations, which is not the case. The only thing that is being added as a new municipal infraction cause is the violation of a stop work order. Someone on the town forum also inquired about where violations are defined, like how do they know what would be a violation? There's not one simple place, but per section 109 of the town code, county housing maintenance standards were adopted as applicable in the town of Garrett Park. Those matters are generally enforced by the county on behalf of the town. There are also provisions in the Garrett Park Town Code that address such matters as right-of-way use, as well as health and sanitary regulations that could be considered a violation if not adhered to. In regard to the section that has generated the most interest, it is most commonly often referred to as a clean and lean provision. And I would say its most common application in the municipalities that I have worked in is overly high grass. Obviously not only unsightly, but can also provide a nesting and breeding ground for rats and other undesirables. There was also a question on the town forum about how tall do grass or weeds have to be before they constitute a violation. Once again, this is spelled out in chapter 26 of the county code. And the county standard for a violation is more than 12 inches in height for grass and for weeds. Regardless of the nature of the violation, just as a matter of practice, every municipality's first course of action is to try to gain voluntary compliance and to cure the violation as soon as possible. Unfortunately, after doing this for over 35 years, I can tell you there are going to be violations in every community where voluntary compliance simply cannot be attained. It's very rare, but when it does occur, it is highly problematic for most communities. In those instances, there's basically a couple courses of action. One is just to ignore it and allow the violation to continue. Another alternative is to pursue remedy of the violation through the court process, which can take, as you can imagine, considerable time and leave the negative community impact of the violation unabated during that time period. The language that is before you tonight in proposed code section 910 would allow the town to take more timely action to remedy a problem. Once again, going back to the example of cutting overly tall grass, rather than drag this through the court process, which can take literally months and months, the town under this ordinance would have the option of basically cutting that grass itself and then assessing the cost of doing so against the party who did not abate the violation voluntarily. In a nutshell, section 910 would provide the town with another tool in its toolbox for dealing with a problem property if the mayor and town council choose to adopt the ordinance. There were also some questions that were posed to me about kind of the term clean and lean and about a lien. Typically what would happen if a municipality does go ahead and cure a violation on its own and then assess the cost against a property owner, you would typically present an invoice for the work that was performed, asking the responsible party for the violation to basically reimburse the town through the invoicing process. That's certainly the most desirable, because if that's successful, the municipality is able to recoup its cost more quickly. If someone does not pay for curing the violation, basically a lien can be put on the property. Under a lien process, as many of you may know, the municipality would not get reimbursed in that instance until such time as the property changes hands and any liens are cleared. So I'm hoping this additional detail was helpful to the mayor and town council, and certainly those community members who I think have posed a lot of questions in recent days on the town forum. Certainly I'd be happy to answer any questions that the mayor and town council have.
So I want Lisa, Councilmember,
Yep.
I'll come to you in just a second.
Sure.
I just want to clarify what I'm hearing from you, Barb, and that is we are not establishing any new rules about how upkeep should be maintained on private property, correct?
We are not changing anything that's in the county code. That's their code and we adhere to their standards. The one exception,
Right.
Mayor, I did want to clarify is that we are declaring a violation of a stop work order as a violation or an infraction.
Okay. And so all we're doing is saying we've had these regulations on the books for years, and we've just never had the tools required to enforce them. And this is merely a way of finally giving the town enforcement authority.
I would say there have been tools that have existed. Certainly the legal process is one of those. As I mentioned, most of what I would consider to be property maintenance violations are in Chapter 26 of the county code. One of the changes that I mentioned sort of early in my remarks that the town attorney incorporated was basically including language that would give the town the option of prosecuting municipal infractions directly, if we so chose. So there are a few changes, but I would say overall, the violations that exist today before passage of this ordinance are the same potential for violations that would exist after its enactment, if you so choose. And it's simply giving the town more tools to deal with a problem property.
Okay. So just in terms of timing for this ordinance, I think that it's probably prudent to go ahead and put it on the calendar for November for adoption, so that we have appropriate amount of time to discuss it and to hear from residents and make sure that we're all comfortable with our discussion. Does that work for you, Barb?
Works for me.
Council members, is that okay with you? Okay. All right. Councilmember Max, please.
I just wanted to understand if a property owner has decided to remove their grass in their front yard and put native flowers or grasses that are more environmentally responsible, and those grasses get really tall, what happens if neighbors around that person's property doesn't like how it looks?
It's a good question, Lisa. Rather than my speculating, since it would be, I'd be interpreting a provision of county code. I'd prefer not to do that on the fly, but I'd be happy to look that up and bring that information back to you all.
Okay. But I think the important thing is if we do pass this, we wouldn't go onto somebody's property and do anything until they're notified and we try to work it out before we take any legal or lien.
Yes, that's correct. Basically, the process would be to give appropriate notice to the party of what the violation is, ask them to address it or cure it, and then make sure that they have advance notice of what will happen if it's not cured.
Okay, that's helpful. But I think there are people in town who decided to remove their grass that aren't grass and are taller. And I just wonder how to fit into this.
Yeah, what I will do, Lisa, is I will reach out to someone at the county and ask them specifically about that question. I don't want to speculate and give you wrong information tonight.
So there's a property on Oxford on the left.
Okay.
Almost on the end of the street. I can send you the address where she's
that would be great.
Wildlife.
I'd like to maybe send the county a picture.
Yeah, right. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Councilmember Schultz.
So my question right now is, given the fact that we already have a method through the county which does not involve use of the courts unless they're required, that is calling code enforcement. And I know that at least one of my neighbors has had code enforcement called a few times, and they have gone to some forced removal of items from the property. and you're already having to go ask the county about this and that, why is it that we're duplicating effort when we can just go call the county and say, hey, we've got a code violation here. We'd like you to come over and look at it.
I think that's a fair question, Phil, and I think I'm not sure, we're getting some feedback. Probably if someone is not speaking, if you can mute, because I think we're getting some feedback right now in the recording. I think sometimes what will happen, Phil, is we might be in a position, depending on the nature of the violation, to respond more quickly. But I would say certainly the first step should be for the town to reach out directly to the property owner, advise he or she of the violation, and just ask for voluntary compliance. I did that myself recently with an issue that a resident brought to me, and it was resolved like within 24 hours. I think barring that, I think we probably go to the county. There are some instances that the town attorney brought to my attention where municipal infraction cases are ultimately prosecuted by the state's attorney. There may be instances where the state's attorney may decline to prosecute, or the town may wish to handle it in a different legal classification. So it's not really a crime per se. So the goal here is to provide flexibility, but certainly not to duplicate efforts with the county. And given our small staff, that should probably be one of the first things we do, is see if the county is able to resolve the issue after voluntary compliance, of course.
I would think that we would want to carefully look at this. And the other thing I will point out, which we can look at later, but is the legislation that we're considering has not considered all of the spots within the code, because there's a number of spots in the code that still contain provisions for fines and the like, and those are not shown as being stricken. So you might want to take a look at that.
Phil, could you repeat what you were saying? I'm not sure I'm following what your concern is.
So what I'm saying is that if you look at the code as it exists, and we look at the document the ordinance that we were presented, the thing does not address a number of spots in the code, for instance, in the housing code, or even in the sanitation code, where there are fines listed, there are procedures listed, and so forth. And I think we need to look at this a little bit more, because there's stuff in there that probably should be taken out if we're using this 107 as an overarching device.
Sure. If you would be okay, I mean, I will look at those sections, but if you have specific links you can send me, that would be helpful.
And the other thing I would say is that some of these sections also included things like hearings before the town council, which will now be eliminated. That's it for me right now. I'm sure we'll debate it more later. Thank you.
Thank you.
Council Member DeBosch.
Thank you, Mayor. I think it would also just, for clarity, be useful to specifically clarify what it constitutes property of an owner, and where that property line stops, and where the maintenance is either assumed by said property owner or the town, and that we are, appropriately and consistently applying that process.
Could you elaborate a little bit, Donna?
So, for instance, where is a person's property considered beyond a sidewalk, if there is a sidewalk, for example? Is that their responsibility, or is that something that the town can take action on, or what is the process there?
Okay, you're talking about the right of way and who's responsible for maintaining it?
Correct.
Okay.
Because in some instances, I think that's where it's going to be have the most issue.
Okay.
Where there's perhaps a sidewalk and then overgrown grass. Who is responsible for that, and what are the next steps if that individual is responsible for maintaining it?
Okay. Thank you. I understand.
Thank you.
Councilmember Bennett.
Hi. Thank you, Barb, for all the work on this. First of all, would this be applicable to our parking regulations as well?
If something it constitutes a violation, are you asking whether we have the authority to tow?
Well, so this establishes higher value penalties than our previous ordinances. And I just couldn't remember, forgot to look up before the meeting what our parking regulations established as parking infraction fees. So I just think that's something we should double check whether this is applicable or whether that's different.
Okay, I will have that prepared for you for the next meeting.
And then we've discussed in the past and with, I believe it was actually the traffic regulations, this different tier, so we have the ordinance level and then another tier of implementing regulations to address some of these more specific, almost procedural points that we've been discussing today about how the town would try to resolve it voluntarily with the homeowner through letters, etc. Would we work out those regulatory or additional procedural measures and have those in writing first before we approve the ordinance, or would we set a certain time period by which we would put those provisions down in writing? I think, a lot of the feedback we've received over the last few days are concerns about inconsistent application of the ordinance as there's turnover in the town office and in the town government leadership.
Shirley, and you don't necessarily have to do it tonight, but we haven't had any discussion of parking regulations during my tenure with the town. So I'm concerned I don't have the context of the issue that you're raising. Would it be possible for you to either give me a rough time frame where I could go back and look at some minutes, or just shoot me an email with some additional thoughts just so I can follow up accordingly?
Sure thing. I think we, right when I joined council, approximately November, December, January of 2019 and 2020, approved the potential hiring of an enforcement officer for parking regulations that had just been brought into effect around that time period. But I'll be happy to forward you some more information.
That would be great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
And then I did just want to, for the other council members' benefit, point out that the Arboretum Committee has raised on a number of occasions situations where these higher fines could be beneficial in cases where builders are making renovations to private property in town, but their construction work could have detrimental impact on town trees. And so in general, the Arboretum Committee has repeatedly expressed concern that the low dollar amounts for fines are of no consequence to a developer, particularly a developer who's going to sell the property at a large profit. Small fees are of no consequence to them. And we really do have to levy rather high fines in order to be able to move certain players to take the protective measures for town trees that we would expect.
Yeah, I think, Shirley, we've had at least one instance that I personally was involved in where we had reason to believe that someone was violating the terms of their building permit by how they were parking vehicles on the site. That is an instance where the town could issue a stop work order, and at least in this proposed ordinance, if someone were then to violate a stop work order, then it's a fine of $1,000. That is the maximum municipal infraction fine that is allowable under Maryland law.
Thank you, Barb.
Okay.
All right. So as I said, we're going to set this aside and, oh, well, do I need to do a motion to introduce it? All
There
right.
would need to be one.
Okay. All right. Looking for a council member to motion to introduce the ordinance.
I can make a motion to table.
Clarify, please. I'm sorry, could we clarify, or did we make any edits to the ordinance as part of our discussion or not?
My understanding, Jerry Lee, is that there are a number of items that I need to follow up on, and at your next meeting, should this be introduced and considered for adoption in November, that those amendments should be prepared and ready for your consideration in November. But I don't believe you've acted on anything specifically tonight. You've given guidance of follow-up items that I need to do.
And since it's not been introduced even, it's not that there's
Right.
nothing to amend at this
Correct.
point. So this is just setting up the teeing up the discussion and then subsequent voting in November.
That's correct.
So that would mean research further over the next month, introduce in October, potentially vote in November then, or is it?
Introduce now. I mean, there's no reason, nothing that says that we would have to, that we can only then vote on it in 30 days and we can put that off.
Okay, yeah, it's 30-day minimum. There's no, it can be longer.
So can I get one of the council members to move to introduce the ordinance?
I'd like to move to table it until October because we're not ready yet. We don't even know what we're voting on because Barb's still got to do some work.
But we're not voting on anything. We're just saying that this is up for consideration. I mean, we can vote on that.
We do two votes. We do two votes. The first vote during the introduction, second one when we're complete with it. But we're introducing something that's already incomplete right now. So I'm not 100% sure how one would vote for something we don't even know what we're going to do with it between now and then, and having two votes.
I would have to agree, I think. I'd feel more comfortable agreeing now that Barb would do the research and provide an updated version for introduction in October, as opposed to agreeing to introduce this, still fairly early draft, which we know it may substantially change between now and October.
Okay, so then there's a motion to table this discussion. Barb, is that the appropriate step?
I don't even think you need to table. You could just fail to introduce it.
Okay, should we even ask then to vote on that or just not? Just move on?
If there's not a first and a second, it automatically is not introduced.
All right, well then let's just move on then. I saw that Carolyn Schauker appears to be on the call, and I wanted to give her the opportunity. She expressed a desire to make a presentation to the council. So Carolyn, if you can please tell us your name and street address, please. But you're still muted. We can't hear you, Carolyn. We need for you to unmute.
Can Barb unmute her? Okay.
No, it doesn't look like it. I just tried.
I got it, I think. Okay, I'm Carolyn Schraker. I live at 4711 Argyle at the top of the Snow Hill. And I moved here in the 1960s. So I have a fair degree of understanding of the history. And I was raised, in effect, by the people who did so much in the 50s and early 60s to make this the town that it is. I was going to propose what Phil suggested, which is to table this motion and refine it a good deal. I have a question for you, Barb? Do you need to adopt any part of the county code in order to use it as a basis for determining violations?
That's already been done in terms of property maintenance issues. That is in the code, and
Okay.
we adopted chapter 26 of the county code.
Yes. And you're sure that it applies to the town? That's all I wanted you to check on. Okay.
100% sure.
I still think this leaves a great deal of discretion about for the mayor and the town manager. And so I hope that I think you failed, all of you, to properly get some background settled by the community. And so I hope that you're open to even more ideas from the town as a whole. And I thank you for your discussion tonight, and particularly for your presentation, Barb, about the background. So thank you and good luck, guys.
Thanks, Carolyn.
All right. Okay. Let's move on to the next item, which is budget amendment number 1. Town Manager Matthews.
Sure. This item is a follow-up to your discussion at the July meeting.
Was my little presentation okay, Eddie?
Carolyn, please mute yourself, Carolyn.
I just muted her. It's okay. At your meeting in July, you had some discussion about funding for certain baseline activities associated with the property gifted to the town by Leticia Yendel back in 2006. I think, as everyone's aware, the property is located at 11321 Kenilworth Avenue. As set forth in the deed of conservation easement, the property can only be used as a public park and or a wildlife sanctuary. At your meeting in July, we had some discussion about the anticipated cost for fully developing the property as a passive meditative park space. In approximate dollars, it's probably about $350,000. As the mayor and town council are aware, I have submitted for funding under the program Open Space Program, as well as the Community Parks and Playground Program. The program Open Space Grant Funding Program does have a 25% required local match. Community Parks and Playground does not have any match. Basically, what you decided on July 11th was to fund certain, I guess what you refer to as baseline activities associated with the eventual development of the property. The activities that you wanted to fund include the demolition of the single-family home on the property and certain site restoration, including tree pruning and the removal of invasive plants. There is bamboo on the property, for example. Additionally, we previously contracted for certain, what I refer to as pre-development studies, specifically a boundary and topographical survey, a hazardous building materials assessment, and a phase 1 environmental study, and funding is needed to cover the cost of those items. The ordinance that is before you this evening for introduction would amend the FY 2023 budget to implement the direction you provided in July. I do think it would be helpful to, this was something that I am recommending, you didn't specifically direct this, but that we would create a new capital budget account entitled Yendel Park. I think just in case we do get some grant funding, it would be helpful to segregate what we're actually spending on the property and make it easy to track. What would happen this evening if you enact this ordinance at your next meeting would be to transfer the $75,000 that you previously set aside in reserve for the Yendel property. That $75,000 would be transferred to the newly created capital account. You also directed that additional funds totaling just over $65,000 would also be transferred to this account. That's roughly $66,000 would come from the undesignated money for parks. And also you directed at your last meeting that $40,000 would be transferred from the capital budget contingency account to the Yendel Park item. One item I did want to call to your attention that's in the ordinance that you did not specifically discuss in July because it hadn't occurred yet. As you know, I have been working with the attorney representing Mrs. Yendel, who had agreed that the estate would basically pay to remove the household contents. I mean, they are considerable. So I have received the check in the amount of $12,000, which is the contractual cost for removing the household items. The way this is handled in the ordinance before you this evening is those funds will be credited to a revenue account, and then a corresponding amount would be transferred from the operating budget to the capital budget so that the monies are available for expenditure. So the $12,000 is essentially money in and money out, if you will. With the direction you provided in July, as reflected in this ordinance, if you sort of set aside that $12,000, we would have roughly $140,000 that would be in the Yendel Park account to pay for the studies and those other baseline activities I previously mentioned. So with that, I will be happy to answer any questions that you all have.
Okay, then how about a motion to introduce this ordinance?
Could I ask a question of Phil Schultz? Phil, as the representative to the Parks Committee, I listened into the last Parks Committee meeting, and I think the committee expressed a preference for perhaps not calling it a park, but some other similar term, like maybe Yandel Garden or something like that. I can't remember what it was exactly. And I just wondered if we would want to take this opportunity to go ahead and change those words in this ordinance now before it becomes overly permanent.
I'm gonna jump in here really quick, Jerry, and mention, because I hadn't yet, that that the Parks and Open Space Committee has a new liaison. That's Lisa Max, Councilmember Max. So she's getting up to speed on that. But as a question for the council, that's something that we can discuss.
Okay. Well, I'm not on that committee, but I did hear that discussion. I don't think it's an unreasonable concept to perhaps not call it a park initially, although I do very much like the idea of naming it after the donor, Ms. Yandel. I'm not necessarily opposed to park, but I just wanted to make sure, since that was discussed in an open meeting, that we consider that discussion before we introduce this ordinance.
I will answer your question here. The answer is that according to the minutes that we have, committee members to propose a proper name for the property to town council.
So it was a deferred to a future parks meeting.
Phil's on mute, but I guess, Phil, it sounds like it was an ongoing
Correct.
discussion
It
for
was,
later.
deferred to a future meeting.
Part of the reason why I had used the term park is because of the language in the deed, which specifically references a public park. And not that I believe this is binding, but I had to come up with a project title in order to apply for grant funding. So rightly or wrongly, I used the phrase Yendel Park Creation Project in what I had to file with the state for grant funding purposes.
I wonder if at a later date, there's going to be a time where the official name has to go out so it can go on maps as such. Maybe there's time to figure that out between now and then to see. I'd really like the town to stick to what Ms. Yandel asked for, and not really veer for it, or veer from it. So see if we can figure out what the space is going to be, and I'm hoping there's going to be some utility for residents there. It's a pretty healthy chunk of change to spend on something that, I would hope the town will be able to get some use out of the property and some enjoyment out of the property. I think that's what was wished for.
I'm not quite sure where to go with this. If, Barb, do you see there being any confusion with changing the name at this point or waiting into the future? Is that something that you can inquire about?
I can certainly inquire about that. I do think we need to, if we're creating a capital budget account, which is certainly what I would recommend you do, because as I said, the one funding source, which is essentially guaranteed at this point, does have a required match. You could certainly name a capital budget account this evening, Joanna, and then choose to amend it at some future date if you want. You're not going to lose the history. It's just really more creating the account and having something to call it.
I'm
happy
to talk to Jack and see if he can put it on the next meeting's agenda to come up with a name that the committee wants
Okay.
to propose, and then we can vote on it at our next meeting.
And if it's something different, I think in the interim, I like Lisa's suggestion. You could always amend the ordinance to change the name of the account. In the intervening 30 days, I will also reach out to the Maryland Department of Natural Resources because they are the grantor agencies for the funds I've applied for.
That seems reasonable to me.
Okay. So is there, how do y'all feel about introducing this ordinance in spite of this name question?
I'm happy to put it forward.
Okay. So if you could please say that you move to introduce ordinance.
I move to introduce ordinance number 2022/5, amendment number 1 regarding the Lendl property.
Lisa, if I may, and as part of your motion, since you all did not introduce the prior ordinance, could you include in your motion to renumber this ordinance as 2022-4? I think that will just help the records be a little clearer so it doesn't look like something got lost along the way.
Okay. I'm happy to introduce ordinance 2022-4 for adoption, amendment number 1 regarding the Lendl property.
Is there a second?
I would second it.
Okay, thank you.
Or let Stephen, either way.
Oh, I had a question. It looks like 2 more bullets down, there was an adoption of resolution number 4.
Right.
Are we double using number 4 or is that?
There are actually separate numbering protocols. So resolutions have their own numbering sequence and ordinances have their own as well.
Got it.
All right. Okay. So let's vote please on introducing ordinance number 2022-4. This budget amendment. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposition? Okay. So ordered. Ordinance is introduced. The time is 8:20, and we are moving on to the next item, which is adopting resolution number 2022-3, which relates to appointing a resident agent. Barb?
Yeah, thank you. So Maryland law requires any political subdivision in the state to designate a person to serve as the jurisdiction's resident agent. The resident agent essentially is the person who is designated in state records upon whom process, notice, and subpoenas to custodians of public records may be served under certain circumstances. If you basically don't properly give service to the resident agent, then it's not properly served. So I was just happening to be working on something and clicked on something in state records and found out that Jean Swearingen was still listed as the town's resident agent, which obviously is a problem. So basically, we need to designate a new resident agent. In discussing this matter with the town attorney, we agreed that it would be appropriate to designate Town Attorney Ronald M. Bolt as the resident agent for the town of Garrett Park. So I'm asking this evening for you all to adopt resolution number 2022-3 and authorize me to sign and file with the State Department of Assessments and Taxations all the necessary paperwork to effectuate Mr. Bolt's appointment as our resident agent.
Any questions?
Well, why wouldn't we just use the town manager?
I believe Ron suggested it be him because I think these are generally legal documents, Phil, that are served since it's basically a subpoena or something of that legal nature. So basically what I would be doing is forwarding it to Ron Bolt. So I think Ron thought it would just be simpler to have it come directly to him.
Jerry?
I had the same question. So thank you for clarifying. Is there any downside or upside or anything we should be aware of related to that change?
No, it's not uncommon at all to, I mean, you can have a variety of people. Sometimes it's the city clerk, sometimes it's the town manager, oftentimes it is the town attorney, because as I said, these are generally legal service issues that are affected by the resident agent designation.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Need someone to move to adopt the resolution?
So I will move to adopt resolution number 22-3, appointing a resident agent. In this case, it will be the town attorney.
Can we get a second, please?
I'll
And
second.
second,
Okay, that would be Councilmember Max seconding it. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Five ayes and no nays. So the resolution is adopted. Moving on, the time is 8:24, and we're moving on to resolution number 2022-4, reestablishing membership in the Montgomery Municipal Cable Incorporated. Town Manager Matthews, kick this off.
Thank you. The resolution that's before you this evening would reestablish the town's membership in Montgomery Municipal Cable. I'm going to refer to it as MMC because it's a little bit shorter. I think as almost everyone likely knows, MMC is a government access station in Montgomery County. The station airs on channel 16 on Comcast, Verizon, and RCN, and simultaneously also streams live on MMC's YouTube channel. MMC was created by the Montgomery County chapter of the Maryland Municipal League in 1995. It was established, among other things, to increase community awareness among residents of Montgomery County by broadcasting municipal events, educational programs, and other content that might be of interest to the community. Currently, Channel 16 serves the 16 smaller municipalities in Montgomery County and is funded by public education and government, often referred to as PEG grants, that the municipalities receive through the franchise agreements with Comcast, Verizon, and RCN. So for those of you who may not be familiar with PEG grants, there's two types of them. One provides funding for operational purposes, and the other provides funding for certain capital expenditures. And basically, it's the franchise fees from Verizon that are solely designated for capital purposes. So of the 16 smaller municipalities that are served by Montgomery Municipal Cable, 15 of them contribute 100% of their PEG operating grants to MMC to cover the channel's operating expenses. Garrett Park is the one exception among those 16 municipalities. And then in terms of the capital PEG grants, 14 of the 16 municipalities turn their capital grants over to MMC. The two exceptions are the town of Chevy Chase and the town of Garrett Park. My understanding in talking to the station manager is that the town of Chevy Chase elected to retain its PEG capital grants to maintain and upgrade certain audiovisual equipment that they installed. So basically, in return for the contributions made by the municipalities, MMC provides a number of services. They help with whatever video services are needed by the municipalities. I think particularly during the pandemic and in the wake of the pandemic, a lot of that assistance has come in the form of, particularly helping people figure out how to do hybrid meetings. They also perform the services that we currently contract for with Grant Peacock, such as uploading the municipalities' meetings to our YouTube channel. And as I mentioned, they have also helped municipalities in sort of transitioning to hybrid meetings by coming up with a plan, either providing or helping with equipment and implementing the new meeting model. So I think if the town keeps its capital PEG grant funding, then what MMC would do is not actually purchase the equipment, but would provide advice and guidance on what needs to be purchased. If basically you turn over your PEG capital funds, then MMC would actually purchase the equipment itself. Also wanted to mention, among the other services that MMC provides, is they do work with the Montgomery County chapter of MML to record and rebroadcast speakers at the monthly chapter meetings. And they also provide access to other county programming, such as the weekly public health briefing by the county executive or other county officials, any town halls that the county is sponsoring on issues such as youth, racial equity, public safety, transportation, anything that might be of general interest. From a fiscal standpoint, MMC, basically their fiscal year is on a calendar year, not a July 1st year like ours or like the counties. Included in your agenda packet, in addition to information provided by MMC from their annual report, they also were kind enough to provide a summary of the operating and capital revenues that we've received during the time period 2017 to 2021. I think anybody who sort of follows technology knows that a lot of people have chosen to cut the cord, if you will. And so you will see in looking at attachment 4 sort of a steady decline in the franchise revenues that we've received. Operating revenues, as I mentioned earlier, come from the franchise agreements with Comcast and RCN. They've ranged during that 2017 to 2021 time period from a high of just over 18,000 to a low of just over 14,000. All of these franchise fees have specific designated purposes for which we're supposed to be using the funds. The operating funds can be used for a variety of operating purposes. We don't do this, but several of the municipalities I worked for in Montgomery County did have fairly robust, media presence. So they were paying their staff, insurance, any legal cost. In our case, what we've been using the operating funds for are to, in the past, pre-pandemic, to pay for Grant Peacock to actually tape the town council meetings and then basically, refine the recording and upload it to our YouTube channel. So basically we would be switching, having Montgomery Municipal Cable do that instead of, contracting for that service ourselves. Capital revenues come strictly from the franchise agreement with Verizon. They have ranged for the town from a high of just over 12,000 to a low of about 10,000. As I mentioned, these funds all have specific purposes outlined in the franchise agreement. For the capital funds, allowable uses include, but aren't limited to, if you create studio facilities, kind of studio production equipment, editing, program playback equipment, things of that nature. You can also use the capital funds to buy any computers that you need, any type of dark fiber, internet access, equipment, and other types of expenses. So the resolution that is on your agenda tonight for your consideration would reestablish the town's membership in Montgomery Municipal Cable as drafted. And after discussing this matter with the mayor, it is proposed that MMC would retain the town's PEG operating grant funds, which would be applied to our required membership fee. Our recommendation would be for the town to probably retain its PEG capital grant funds, particularly given the discussion that you all are having about making some technological improvements in town hall itself. If you go forward with the renovation. If we were to retain our PEG capital grant funds, I would recommend that we change our practice as to how those monies are handled. and that we basically hold them in a reserve account just to ensure that they are not getting blended in with other operating funds and aren't being used for purposes for which they're not allowed to be used. Mayor, did I miss anything? Obviously, this is an issue that you have a lot of interest in and you and I have discussed. Did I overlook anything that you wanted highlighted?
No, I just wanted to point out that we would have access to their recording and broadcasting or making available for residents, not just council meetings, but other kinds of discussions and forums and things like that. So, and if we wanted to try to get them to come out for the 4th of July parade, we could do something like that. There are all kinds of things that they can do for us.
Yeah, I did want to add, and something that the mayor said jogged my mind. So if you were to adopt this resolution, what would happen is the first step would be for staff to work with Montgomery Municipal Cable to identify the equipment that we would need to purchase. And basically, Montgomery Municipal Cable would be on site as they were at your August 31st meeting. So they would be there to kind of handhold us for the first, couple meetings. But after that, any assistance they would provide would be remote. We would be basically have a number to call if we ran into any technical issues. So certainly there would be, some setup time on staff's part just to set up the equipment for every meeting. But I wanted to let you know how that would work, that you wouldn't necessarily see a Montgomery Municipal Cable tech at each and every town council meeting going forward. Because basically almost everybody meets on a Monday, so they're quite in demand.
Looks like there's a question from Councilmember Max.
So I have two questions. One question is, what's the amount of the money that we're going to give to Montgomery Cable? And the second question is, would we then continue to retain the private firm that's doing a lot of the technology work for us, or would we end that contract?
The amount, Lisa, it's hard to give you a definite amount because it's going to vary depending on the number of, actual cable subscribers. So it has been going down. Roughly in the most recent year for the operating funds, we've been getting in 2021, we got just over around $14,300. It's been steadily declining. On the capital grant side, the mayor and I were proposing that we retain those funds. The most recent 2021 fiscal year for Montgomery Municipal Cable, we got about $10,000 in capital funds. In terms of whether or not we would retain our current contractor, I think that might be somewhat redundant in many respects. We're joining Montgomery Municipal Cable to get the benefit of their services. So I would think we would want something in return.
Thank you.
Councilmember DeBosch.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Barb. You had mentioned that the MPEG funds would either be turned over or for MCC to purchase the equipment, or for us to keep the funds and MCC recommend what equipment we would need.
Right.
Would there be any benefit in turning over those funds? I could imagine that MCC has a connection or a better price point for equipment should we need it.
I think in terms of the initial joining of MMC and how that's handled, it's probably neutral. I think going after that initial investment, once you turn over your capital funds, it's not as if MMC is holding them and they're necessarily going to come back to Garrett Park. So I think in talking to the mayor about this issue, and I have talked to Montgomery Municipal Cable about this, given the discussion you all have had and your desire to sort of upgrade the technology in town hall, I think at least in the short term, there would be some benefit of us holding on to the capital funds ourselves.
Thank you for the clarification. I appreciate it.
Councilmember Schultz.
Hopefully you can hear me. So I've got several questions. The first one is regarding what do we actually get after the first couple of meetings? It sounds like we're not going to have much different from what we've had in the past. I mean, we already upload our own stuff to the to YouTube, and I'm wondering what benefit we would get for $14,000, or basically $1,200 a month. You know, using the last year's numbers, because it seems like a lot of money for that. And the second piece of this is, do we have to do a budget ordinance, an ordinance for the budget amendment? Because basically this has been money coming in. Now we're about to turn it over to somebody else, or we're going to expend it by sending it to somebody else. And I would think that we need to do some type of budget change to accommodate that.
Okay, I'll try to make sure, Phil, I answer both your questions, okay? In terms of the initial part, my understanding is before the pandemic, the town was paying about $550 per meeting to have an outside party come and record that. Currently, with meetings, for example, tonight being a virtual meeting, what would happen is I'm recording through Zoom. I basically send the recording to the town contractor. They do some cleanup work, and basically they post it to the YouTube channel. If this resolution is adopted, basically Montgomery Municipal Cable would basically take care of that process. In terms of uploading to our YouTube channel, we would give them access so they could basically just post the recording, because there is some refinement of the recording that happens. It's not the raw recording that you get off of Zoom. They would also post it to their own YouTube channel, meaning Montgomery Municipal Cable's channel. And I think, as the mayor alluded to, you know, there would certainly be some technical assistance in terms of going to a hybrid meeting. That's not something the town has done before, so certainly there would be a need for equipment and technical assistance. And then I think, as the mayor alluded to, you know, Montgomery Municipal Cable would broadcast other town events. We would have to work with them and have internal discussions about what it is that you would want to broadcast. And have them cover. Certainly, I'm imagining 4th of July parades would be nice. I'm sure they're also highly in demand that same day. I think the other thing I would just say to keep in mind is these funds are restricted in use. I'm not sure the town has always treated them as such. So that's clearly a problem. I think in terms of your second part of your question, Phil, about whether a budget ordinance would be needed, absolutely. You know, you could either provide direction and you know, do that at mid-year, which isn't that far off. We'll be introducing the mid-year budget adjustment, you know, in November. Or I guess the other option you could have is to go ahead and, you know, direct me to go ahead and bring a second budget amendment ordinance forward at your next meeting, if you want something to specifically deal with municipal cable, and that would be more comfortable for you all.
I would think, just following on, I would think that we would need to do that or have it concurrent with our joining, because otherwise we would be spending money without having the budget properly updated. I'm just, how much does a contractor charge currently to do whatever rework and refinement they need to do?
While we are in a virtual meeting setting, it's $200 a meeting. I'm going to go ahead and mute you, folks. I think I'm getting some feedback. I think the other thing, at least at one time, he had told me that he had sold much of his equipment. So I think we would need to determine whether he even still had equipment that could be used.
I guess the question would be, if we purchase our equipment ourselves, and looking at what happened with the last meeting, I would think that we should be able to do most of it ourselves, because we never had to move the camera. Otherwise, we're going to have to post somebody in the back like they did,
Yeah.
which might mean an extra staff person.
Yeah, I think even with their posting someone at the back, if you looked at the video version of the meeting as opposed to just the audio recording, it was essentially a stationary camera, which is what I would say most municipalities do, unless they're a Tacoma Park or a Rockville that have very robust communication staff.
I'm questioning basically,
Is it
what are
worth
we
it?
getting from, yeah, is it worth it? But I'll let somebody else speak. But thank you.
Councilmember Paskowski.
Thanks. Just maybe it's a little bit in line with what Phil was asking. I was curious about the additional meetings. Would it just be, it sounds like it could be more than just once a month for council meeting. Maybe it could be many or most or all committee meetings additionally. But I was curious if, is there any cap to that, like 5 per month or a certain amount per year?
I don't think there is, but I think as Joanna alluded to, this is not, and I want to be very clear, because obviously you all were trying to assess the merits of joining Montgomery Municipal Cable. It's not going to be a case that they are going to be sending, they have a very small staff. Basically, the folks that you saw at the August 31st meeting, I believe is at least 50% of their total station staff. So I think there will, as Joanna alluded to, I think there would be certain, special events such as a 4th of July parade or something that might be viewed as being of more interest beyond the borders of Garrett Park, potentially. But I certainly don't want to, in any way create a misimpression that Montgomery Municipal Cable staff is going to be, at every committee meeting, for example. I think if some of that is to be done, once again, I think we would, there would likely be some reliance on town staff in terms of setup and things of that nature. They would be available for technical assistance, but you're not going to see, once again, Montgomery Municipal Cable staff at each and every town event or meeting.
I guess I was a little bit curious, like, is it something that eventually could be so simple that could be set up even just by the committee itself that's a question for later.
Yeah, I don't know that the setup from what they've relayed and in talking to some of my, city management colleagues, it's not completely benign. I mean, there is some time involved with setting it up. And certainly since our town hall is also used as a rental facility rather than just solely for meetings, it's not a case of you roll the equipment out and it sits waiting for the next meeting to come up. It's going to have to be brought out, set up, put back because someone else is going to be using the town hall space as a rental.
Yeah, has to be secured. Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Bennett.
Hi, Barb. Thank you for laying this out for us. Some of the benefits I can see that aren't purely financial seem to be simply exposure as a municipality that is independent of Kensington and Bethesda and soon to be North Bethesda. Because one of the things that frustrates me greatly, and I would love to put on our future agenda, is that if I put my address into any given GPS, it often transfers it into a 20895 Kensington address. And I don't live in Kensington, and I would prefer that our separate zip code, our separate location be preserved and be more visible than less visible. So I do think that there is a little bit of a more subtle benefit to having Montgomery Municipal Cable recognize us as a separate municipality. And if you look at everything that's online for Montgomery Municipal Cable, it does give some exposure via pictures, links, videos, event amplification that otherwise we are entirely on our own to do, which of course we are capable of doing, but it's always nice to have somebody else amplify on your behalf. And, it could be useful for certain issues that we want to get more exposure for as well.
I think those are great points, Jerry. Thanks for mentioning those.
Any other questions by the council, and are we open to a motion to adopt this resolution? Or
I'm happy to propose adopting the resolution.
can you
Number 22-4, establishing membership in Montgomery Municipal Cable, Inc.
Okay. Is
I would
there,
like to second that.
okay, thank you, Councilmember DeBosch. Support for this? Vote, please. Ayes, nays?
Aye.
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 Okay, any opposition?
I'll vote for it.
I'm sorry, Phil, I didn't hear that.
No, I'm not opposing it.
Okay.
Okay,
Joanna, before we move on, obviously Phil raised an excellent point about the kind of reflecting this decision and direction in the budget. Are you all comfortable waiting to mid-year to handle any adjustment in the accounts, or do you want me to bring something back next month? If anyone has a preference.
I'd be fine with the mid-year if everyone else is.
I'm
When
fine as
again?
long as you don't see the downside, Barb.
I'm sorry, what did you say, Jerry Lee?
If that's what you advise and you don't see a financial downside, I would agree with that.
Okay,
The
I think
mid-year.
it might just keep things a little simpler than to kind of, keep bringing budget ordinances forward, if you all are good with that.
I would just like the budget or whatever you're doing with the budget to reflect that we're going to stop paying for the outside consultant that we're paying for now. So the net effect would be X.
Right.
Okay.
So I will do that.
Yeah, that's a good
Okay.
point.
Thank you.
So we voted to introduce this, right? And we'll be voting on it at the next meeting.
The resolutions are basically brought forward and there's only one vote on them. So I think if there's, so I think unless anyone wants to reconsider, you've essentially voted to adopt it already.
I'm okay with that, but I appreciate the clarification.
Yeah, thank you all.
okay. Let's see, the time is 8:49, and for the next item, we're going to bring up Assistant Town Manager Kayla Bucher, who's going to talk about authorization for a contract for leaf removal services. Kayla?
Good evening, everyone. And someone mentioned pumpkin spice earlier on the listserv, and with pumpkin spice season comes the fall of the leaves. Unfortunately, earlier this year, when there was some transitional items happening when Andrea Fox was departing and Barb was coming on board, one of the things that did not get flagged at the time was the need to do an RFP in the spring to get a new contract in place for the leaf removal. That was highlighted when Beth Key reached out in August of this year with a proposal for a 3-year contract to continue providing service to the town. Given that this would normally be something that was put out for bid and that the time frame was not something that would comfortably allow for an RFP to go out, bids to come in and be considered. Councilmember Schultz, did you have a question? Okay, I'm getting some feedback from you. Please mute. Thank you. Okay. Because of the time frame, I was requested by Town Manager Matthews to reach out to contractors and get a quote from them, just that there would be some options to be considered by council. I reached out to 4 companies, including Beth Key Landscaping and Hughes Landscaping, which had back in 2019 provided bids for a 3-year contract. I also reached out to BAM Landscaping and Shorb Landscaping. Due to the time frame, BAM declined to turn in a quote, and I did not hear back from Shorb Landscaping. So of the 2 companies that I did hear back from, Beth Key quoted the contract for 1 year at $29,807.25. Hughes Landscaping quoted a 1-year contract for the price of $35,000. Again, because of the time frame and because of the fact that this is meant to be bid out fully, This is only a 1-year contract. The intent is to have town staff put out an RFP in spring of 2023 to return to the normal practice of a 3-year contract at that point in time. I'm happy to answer any questions.
My question is, how many times do they come around town and break up the leaves in the
So-
contract?
In keeping with past practices, Beth Key and Hughes both quoted for coming through town once a week.
When is their last pickup, did they say?
So the requested contract dates were from mid-October until the end of December. As both contractors pointed out, it was likely that all of the leaves would be down well before December 31st, but that is what we want the paperwork to reflect, just in case we have a few stubborn trees that don't drop leaves until the bitter end.
Yeah, the opposite is true, actually. There are a bunch of shoe-marred oaks in town that don't drop their leaves until the tail end of January. So it's been like that for a long time. So a bunch of us are out there raking, getting ready for the Super Bowl. So
For the 2023 RFP, we can definitely consider looking for an expanded season to better cover.
okay. And it's usually just one sweep needed. I think Elizabeth Henley had arranged for like a final sweep coming through like the tail end of January the last couple of years, which helped a lot. Before that, we had to bag and can everything.
That's good information to have. Thank you.
So what,
I had a question. Sorry.
no, please.
Kayla, thank you for this. I'm sorry if I missed it, if you said it. How does this 1-year contract amount relate and compare to our previous 3-year contract? And then also, which line item from our budget does this come from? Because I'm not quite sure when I look at the budget, which line item it would come out of.
Okay. I am going to rely on Barb for a bit of help with remembering the budget line item, just because I'm playing catch up.
Sure. Yeah, Geraldine, it comes out of, it's booked to kind of an odd place, but it's 14.1 road maintenance and cleaning, I believe. Yeah,
Sure.
it's 14.1.
Okay, that's very helpful. That was one of the two possibilities I was thinking. So I'm glad I wasn't that far off. And Kayla, how does it compare to the 3-year contract we previously had again?
It's in line with what Beth Key has previously quoted. I don't believe there was more than maybe, and Barb might have a better recollection of this. I think it was only a $200 difference.
Yeah, I don't like Kayla. I mean, I can look it up if you'd like. I can VPN in. I think one difference between this 1-year contract and the prior 3-year is it was for 2 months. The new contract would actually be for 2.5 months, as Kayla mentioned. But it's very much in line. When I was handed the 3-year contract and realized that this had not been bid out, obviously I'm not going to ask that you commit for 3 years for something that didn't follow appropriate bidding procedures. We tried to get as close as we could, but Beth Key did not alter its price from once we told them we were going from a 3-year to a 1-year. Obviously the town has had a very long-standing relationship, and they didn't attempt to adjust their pricing because of that.
Thank you.
Hopefully two quick questions. The first one is there any fuel surcharge on this thing? And also, is there any street sweeping involved?
So it's my understanding that street sweeping has been done as a separate contract and was not part of the scope of what I was asked to get from the contractors. And I do not recall seeing a fuel surcharge on either of the 2 provided quotes. They were all very much a flat fee.
Great, thank you.
I'd like to propose, Kayla, that you go back and get a final sweep in January, Steve, after everything's down, before as an add-on to the price, so we can just get that included before we sign it.
Yeah, it would be helpful. I think even in the past when it was in a pinch, I think Elizabeth might have just moved one of the Decembers to late January, but either way, whichever way it can get covered.
I would agree. I have a tree that likes to drop in late January.
So if I can just clarify, are you all asking for us to add for Kayla to go back and add an additional week in January, or how far into January are you wanting her to ask about? Because obviously different pricing depending on how far into January we go.
I would think it could be just one at the end of January versus every week in January,
Okay.
just to pick
wanted
up
to
any
clarify that.
stragglers. Yeah.
Okay.
I agree.
The tree comes down like clockwork every year, like around the
Okay.
25th. So.
Okay. Thank you all.
All right, is there?
I would make a motion. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was gonna ask if we needed to do a motion for this.
I think it's probably helpful because you're spending money, so it might be helpful, and it's a contract.
Okay. All right, Lisa, you volunteered to move this authorization.
I do.
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you, Jerry Lee. All right, those in favor?
Aye.
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 Sounds unanimous to me. All right, thank you very much. Okay, let's see, the time is 8:58. I don't believe we have any unfinished business. So I'm gonna step over to new business and the appointment of Chris Keller to a seat on the Historic Preservation Committee. It's a seat that has been held by Susie Balamachi prior to now. She's had to step away, and so I have taken the advice of the Historic Preservation Committee Chair Nancy Walls and appointed Chris Keller, and so just wanted to let you all know that we have another vacancy on that committee also, and my understanding is that the hope is to get a volunteer from or who lives within the historic district who has had experience working with issues and limitations of having a historic home. And so we will be sort of doing a targeted recruitment attempt on that front. Lisa, you had a question?
On unfinished business, I'd just like to know where we are with the cameras and the MARC train station, because I haven't heard anything about that for quite some time. Under old business, unfinished business.
I have obtained copies of a county contract, mainly to focus around Penn Place. Obviously, we don't own the train station. It's CSX property, but it's leased to MARC, so we have no right of entry to put cameras up. As I mentioned, I have gotten a copy of the contract from the county so that we wouldn't necessarily maybe have to go out to bid. But candidly, with preparing for your meeting in August and your meeting tonight hasn't allowed a lot of time. So I have the contract documents. I just need to go have the opportunity to go through them. I did hear from someone who is in charge of special operations at the transit police. I'm waiting to hear back from him. He indicated that they might be able to do something with kind of temporary camera setups. He had basically just taken over the assignment. I would add that he reported, as I also have heard from Montgomery County Police, that these acts of vandalism are being all along the metro lines, all along the MARC stations. So they are stretched very thin, but he was going to try to see if he might be able to do something at least on a temporary basis. Not to curse us, but thankfully it's been a little quiet recently, but that could just be because there's almost nothing left to vandalize at the station as well. But I will certainly make every effort to kind of regroup and put more focus on the cameras.
Thank you.
Just checking, I always get confused which mayoral appointments require an actual vote and which don't. I think this one might require a vote.
It does.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Jerry, for bringing that up.
Do we need a motion or do we just go ahead and vote?
I don't think it necessarily matters. I think, as Jerry was alluding to, though, you all do need to confirm the mayor's nomination of Chris Keller.
Okay. So.
Yeah, no objections here.
I'm happy to approve Chris
Okay.
Keller.
No,
Happy to approve as well. And I like the idea of trying to find a replacement for the future seat that could replace what Susie Balamasi brought, which was a lot of direct experience with historic home.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. The recruitment for the next position sounds like a really good idea that you're planning.
Okay. So, Phil, I think you're the only one that we didn't hear from in terms of approving that or.
Sorry with this computer, but I agree. I'm fully in favor of Chris and also in favor of finding somebody who's dealt with historic property for the next open seat if possible.
Great. Great. Okay. All right. Time is 9:03 and we want to move on to updates from council members. Councilmember DeBosch, do you have anything related to the American Rescue Plan, or is that on sort of waiting for other things to happen?
thank you, Mayor. Sorry, my sound was coming in and out. I apologize. Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to confirm that, yes, it is in a holding pattern. Also wanted to reiterate some of the dates that we have in regards to the ARPA funds. To date, we have received both funding tranches for ARPA totaling $1,033,923.86. We have not expended any of it. Those funds are within the accounts of Garrett Park and are not refundable to the state until after, should we not be using them until after the funding deadline. And just as a reiteration, those deadlines are funds must be incurred for costs. They must start March 3rd, 2021. They must be obligated by December 31st, 2024, and must be expended, meaning completely spent by December 31st, 2026. Again, we have all 100% of the funds that we have been allocated, and now it's just the next step is how the town will be utilizing this windfall. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Councilmember Bennett, the Arboretum Committee.
Hi. The committee took a hiatus over several of the summer months and will meet in September, although they are planning to potentially move the meeting to the 28th. So Barb and Kayla, if you know of any potential conflicts for that, please do let Sean Conlon, the chair, and myself know. The Phil Normandy, the arborist, has been assisting the Parks Committee with matters related to the Endo property and other related issues. And the committee is planning to jump right into fall planting list refinement. Phil Normandy always makes a proposed list, and then the committee helps to refine that and identify various issues that might relate to it. So we expect that to be a major issue in the September meeting. Barb has been working with the state on a potential MOU for the trees on Strathmore Avenue. The objective here would be to clarify the town's versus the state DOT's role in maintaining the street trees on Strathmore. There was an MOU that was done at the time of the street being renovated and the sidewalks and the street trees were first planted by the state. However, the state had not registered that MOU in their systems and really was not following it in any way. And so Barb and the state representative have been working through this and have identified that a new, more clear, targeted MOU might be more beneficial. And the objective here would be to give the town more control in the pruning schedule and also the nature of the pruning to be more gentle and consistent with the town's objectives. It is possible, we wanted to make sure that all council members and the mayor are aware that this could result ultimately in the town taking on more financial responsibility than perhaps we thought we had in the past. Sometimes the state has come through and done unnoticed sudden pruning, which of course they took full financial responsibility for, but the town was often not very satisfied with the results. We're still early in the process and Barb will be negotiating on our behalf and she'll keep us up to date as this proceeds, but we did want to make sure everyone was aware that it's possible that by the town pushing for more control of the process, we may end up taking on some additional financial responsibility, but in Barb's estimation, it looks like that may be relatively small in the scheme of things. So more to come on that, but we wanted to give you a heads up. Barb, do you want to add anything on that particular point? Or clarify if I muddled it?
No, I think you did a great job, Lee. I think the issue when this came up was because the state had done some pruning, and thankfully with some of our former town elected officials were able to point me in the right direction. But I think as SHA has refined some of its systems, essentially it's an MOU that dates back to 2003. If it's not in the state system, it essentially doesn't exist. And I would say if you were not part of the conversation at that time, some of the language is a bit challenging to kind of understand. So I think as Lee alluded to, I think the hope would be, and what I've talked to the state about, is that we would have the right of entry to plant along Strathmore, to prune trees, which I think we would do more aesthetically than SHA's contractors. My goal is to have SHA hopefully pay for removal of any of the older trees, because there's really no benefit to the town of paying for that. So hopefully we can work on that. In conjunction with the issue that Lee raised, I also had some discussion with the person at SHA who's in charge of MOUs about possibly getting reimbursement for the town for the mowing activities we do along the Strathmore right-of-way. And the litter pickup, that is something that by MOU, SHA does with municipalities. So since we've been doing it anyway, I figure we might as well see if we can get some reimbursement for that. So thank you, Lee, for bringing it up. I think in discussions with Joanna and Lee, we wanted to make sure the group was aware of it before I take the next step and actually file the paperwork with SHA to initiate the MOU process. So if there's not any discomfort expressed tonight, then I will go ahead and start working on that.
Looks like we have a couple of questions.
Good.
I don't know who goes first.
So my question is, doesn't Pepco usually do the most damage? I mean, Pepco also trims trees, as I understand, or am I wrong? The state just does it all for Pepco, or how's that work?
It depends on the nature of it. You are correct, Phil, that if Pepco has any concerns about interference with their power lines, they can come in, and having worked for a city once that had an electric utility, nobody likes the way utility contractors prune trees. In the case of the pruning that was done by, most recently by SHA on Strathmore, there was a resident who lives on Strathmore who had concerns about drainage issues. And he felt that if the trees were somewhat opened up and there was more light coming onto their property, that the water would not stand as long. And so that's kind of how this whole thing came to light. SHA came in, both Jerry Lee and I were getting bombarded with emails about what are they doing? They don't have any right to be doing this. And so I called SHA and said, hey, don't you know about this MOU? And they said, we have no idea what you're talking about. So that's sort of the history of how we got here. But it will be both, Phil, who, under current circumstances. It could be SHA. That's generally going to be something that's not a power line issue. And SHA is obviously, Pepco's still going to be protecting its power lines.
Right. And I would add that I think if we have more control over the timing and the nature of the pruning, we might be able to mitigate the potential for Pepco doing more radical pruning in the future.
Right.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Steve, you had a question?
Yeah, just real quick. Barb, I think you had mentioned a good point about trying to get reimbursed for the mowing that happens in the space, I guess, between the sidewalk and the highway. I'm just curious of who is responsible for planting grass or anything else that's on the ground in there. A lot of it's gone, and a fair amount of it's eroding. Is that SHA potentially would be able to reimburse us for doing it, or that they would be able to put in seed to kind of reestablish?
That wasn't a specific issue, Stephen, that I talked to them about, but I can do so. It may be a case of, just asking them to take care of it while the right of way is still theirs, and just ensuring that we have a right of entry. Part of this is that SHA, for example, on mowing is going, we would need to submit kind of our cost for doing that, and SHA will sort of look at it in the vein of what would they be paying and how often would they do it. So I don't think there's any guarantee we'll be 100% reimbursed for our costs. Currently, we're having a contractor mow along Strathmore, but certainly something's better than nothing.
Okay, thanks.
And that's all I had that was strictly Arboretum Committee. And I think that would segue into the Waverly Sidewalk discussion, which is joint Arboretum and Sidewalk work with Phil Schulp.
Thank you.
Phil, do you want to take the first cut, or would you like me to? I'll go ahead then initially. So I think we probably reported in a previous meeting that the Arboretum Committee is interested in ensuring that as we redesign the segment of sidewalk that is between Waverly and the post office, that we consider the trees and also the drainage there in terms of potentially upgrading the space to allow for even a rain garden. So the committee worked with the town to bring in a landscape architect who works with Montgomery Parks in their day job. And the landscape architect has done some conceptual schematics for the committee. And Barb shared those with the town engineer to see if we could get agreement as to whether we might be able to make any minor adjustments to the current sidewalk rebuilding plan that would allow for a potential future rain garden installation if the council were to approve whatever funding might be necessary for a rain garden installation. We're still working through the details of whether that is feasible or not. And so the current plan is that Barbara is working to arrange a meeting that would include Phil and myself and the landscape architect and the town engineer so that we could get everyone on site, as well as the Arboretum Committee chair. We could, and Lizzie Glidden-Boyle, who is the project proponent for the rain garden initiative. We'd like to try and have that meeting happen in September so that we can get the sidewalk project on target for June installation. Phil, you probably want to clarify about the sidewalk plans, but that's my understanding of where we are. And we just need to be able to get that meeting through so that we can make sure that if we, whether there are any changes to that design that can be done that can leave open the possibility of a future rain garden or other landscaping improvements that would be beneficial for the arboretum and generally from an ecosystem standpoint. Drainage, those kind of issues.
Yes, no, I think you did a great job. Thank you. The major issues, this thing, I should say, started off initially as some beautification and then morphed into a rain garden, which we had not originally looked at when I was looking at redoing the sidewalk. We still would like to do something to accommodate something in the future. However, we have to be cognizant of the space that we have and the fact that being on a hill might require a lot of money to shore up the hill in order to accommodate something. So the idea was to get both the town's engineer and the landscape architect together to see what could be done and also to ground truth everything, because it seems there are some disconnects between some of the drawings and from the architect and some of the drawings from the town's engineer. The idea is to try and move this thing along as quick as reasonably possible so we can get this thing set up for a spring bid or maybe even sooner if we're lucky. So that's it.
Do you think it's possible, because I'd also like to get this is a stretch of sidewalk that has been sort of hanging out there that we need to finish, get that project done. It seems that there should be a way to do the sidewalk with future plans possible, without having to, or neither prevent future rain garden or some other consideration of other use of that space, other drainage issues. What am I trying to say? I think moving forward is the positive thing, as long as we are doing it in a way that's not harming a future attempt to better the water movement. I think that's important.
Right.
Yes.
I think that's exactly where we want to go. We want to not stop the sidewalk project and not cause any undue delay, but the Arboretum Committee is asking for a little bit of a slowdown to potentially consider if any minor adjustments to the sidewalk plan could better facilitate possible future drainage improvements and other park improvements that could be both aesthetic as well as better for the treescape and for the park in general. I neglected to mention that part of this proposal is the idea that conceptually in the future, if the town had funding for it and we're interested, you might be able to turn that hillside into an amphitheater that might be useful during events like the 4th of July celebration. I want to be clear that with so many other projects going on in town, we would obviously bring that proposal to the council in the future. The point right now is to work with the sidewalk design to leave open future possibilities and try to avoid precluding future possibilities for that space. I think there are a couple of questions.
I agree.
I had a quick question. Is lighting included in the sidewalk plan you guys are working on? Because I know that's kind of could use some lighting on the sidewalk.
Without a doubt, that's one of my major things is to have lighting installed in there. So definitely there would be some type of lighting.
Thank you.
I had a question. Can I see what's been going on with this? I think I've asked before about the sidewalk, and I think I heard murmurs about a rain garden before. I haven't seen anything. I was curious what all is happening. And it was years ago, but I had to kind kind of fight a little bit just to get the sidewalk slowed down. And I kept urging the town to hire a landscape architect, not even a landscape designer, but a real landscape architect, because I see it as not just the sidewalk, but like it's the edge of a park, and it does have more potential. Just an initial idea I had is it could be, and maybe this the same thing people are talking about with an amphitheater, but so you don't have a really steep drop off down off the side where if somebody is riding a bike and falls off, they can go down 20 feet, but maybe it's rolling hills that you could sit on that stay drier. Could be, more useful for events. I'm curious about the potential for those kind of things. I'd be kind of reluctant to support down the road a rain garden that just really makes a not so useful park space. Maybe it is, or maybe it isn't that, but I haven't seen anything. I'd like to see it.
Stephen, can we, I think Barb can correct me, but I think the landscape architect's drawings are conceptual, but also to some extent proprietary, because we did have such a limited agreement with her. So we wanted to, I'm not saying we can't share her drawings with you, but I just need to double check offline with Barb to make sure before we share her drawings further. Part of our thought was if we could get through this meeting to see if it's even feasible with the engineer and the architect, the landscape architect at the same site at the same time, then the next step, of course, would be taking it back to the committee and the council for consideration. But it's very conceptual at this point.
Okay. Thanks.
I know that I'm kind of talking around this. I just, because I know that there was a little bit of a quirk there about sharing her drawings.
Okay. It's probably like a kitchen place. A lot of times they have that mark that you can't reproduce. I guess down the road, I'd be also curious to kind of see what the technical goal of the rain garden would be. I've worked on those before, and I know there's pretty tight limits on what you can really accomplish with them. So, I know it's a concept that makes a lot of people feel good, but I'd be curious like how much effect it really has for kind of retaining and affecting the quality of stormwater.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I believe also there's still some technical work that will need to be done in a way of a percolation test, et cetera, to make sure that the site is suitable for that.
Okay.
Thank you, Jerry. Time is 9:24. I'm going to call on Councilmember Max for an update on the Archives Committee.
Yeah, Claire sent out a little memo. I had Barbara send it to everybody. I can read it, but it doesn't really have anything earth-shattering in it. Just a little bit about what she's been doing. I'd say that you all should read it, and if you have any questions, you can let me know. So just for time's sake, unless you want me to read it. No, you can go on to the next one.
Steve, accessory dwelling units.
I'm going to probably rely on Barb a little bit for help on this. She's been doing some work with the town attorney, looking into legalities of accessory dwelling units. This came up a couple years ago. County Council was really pushing hard on the concept of accessory dwelling units. And there are two basic types. One could be attached. It could be in your home. It might be your basement. It might be a back third of your house. The other type is a detached accessory dwelling unit called a dadu. So it's really kind of almost like a lot of times it's called a granny flat, or it's a carriage house. It could be a unit, like a Fonzie style unit over top of a garage. Any of those type things. So the town has to adopt the use that was approved by County Council. I think it was January 2020, but I might be a little bit off on my memory on that date. But so the town doesn't have the power to regulate that we would not allow them, but we do have the power, just like we do with setbacks on main houses and utility buildings, to be able to regulate how they're handled in Garrett Park. A lot of jurisdictions had, they wanted to avoid having, two front doors that might look like a duplex. So that was one of the things that was kind of handled. And, in our case, we have a lot of long, slender lots. We may want to look at how a detached dwelling unit may appear if one were to be built if it shows up on a long lot on a corner. But this is something that I want to take it up to the Land Use Advisory Committee to kind of assess the rules that we have on the books now and see how that might apply to some likely scenarios especially with the detached accessory dwelling units over the next month or so, in hopes that we would be able to bring, if either zero or some small ordinance changes that would be able to sort of guide the process on how they may appear in Garrett Park. So that's one issue about how they might appear. What we found out also, and that's the thing that Barb's been working a lot on, is that a few years back, I think it was a little bit before my time on the council, there was a growing concern about the proliferation of Airbnb and similar things, and a lot of short-term rentals may or may not be good uses as neighbors. So the town took some actions to opt out of certain county code sections. And they were really on the advice of an attorney that was working for the county, I think at that time, the planning board. Barbara can correct me if I'm misremembering. So they may have gone, with good intentions, may have gone a little bit too far, and we ended up opting out of, I think it's 2 sections of code. One of them inadvertently opted us out of county oversight of leasing. So that's like leasing an entire house or leasing a dwelling unit within a house, leasing an apartment, so on and so forth. And that's something that, as we discussed it through, it seems like it makes more sense to opt back into that with the county. So the county would have that oversight for anybody that's leasing either a whole house or a accessory dwelling unit within town. So I think the thinking is to try to bring forward that that change back that would still keep us protected from short-term rentals, but would not have us inadvertently barring leasing altogether. Or it kind of leads it to where the town kind of opts out of the county, and we'd have to have our own sort of leasing oversight, which I don't think is anything any of us really want to get involved in. So that's sort of the intent, is to bring that up in the October meeting and introduce those changes, discuss them, and then potentially approve those changes in November. Did I get that 90% or better correct, Barb?
Yes, you did. So without mentioning the name of the resident, what happened is we kind of, to tag on to what Stephen said and why I started digging into this with the town attorney, we had a resident who is trying to get through the County Department of Permitting Services for essentially a lower level renovation. The person intends to bring in a family member. So as Stephen alluded to, kind of way back when this issue was brewing in the county about primarily Airbnbs, it was a now retired legislative attorney with the county who basically opined, rightly or wrongly, since most of the municipalities do not have zoning authority, that given the outcry from some of the municipalities, that their way of opting out of having short-term rentals in their communities was to essentially opt out of a certain provision of the county code. What is now happening for the resident who's attempting to get through DPS is the town also opted out of Chapter 29, which is the county landlord licensing code. So essentially, DPS will not issue a building permit to this resident because there's really no mechanism currently for that unit to be licensed. So the resident is sort of caught in a bit of a purgatory right now. I have spoken to the resident about, what the background of the issue is, because it does have some history, as Stephen alluded to. The resident is giving some thought to modifying their building plans to essentially remove like a stovetop. Basically, under county building regulations, it's not considered an accessory dwelling unit unless you have certain facilities, including a stovetop. I advise the resident that we would be bringing this matter before you tonight, at least to introduce it and maybe to give you all some time to discuss it before they alter their plans. So as Stephen said, I think he's in the process of scheduling a land use advisory committee to talk about accessory dwelling units and whether you all want to, create any kind of building regulations. it kind of all came up at the same time, but it's somewhat of a different issue than whether or not you choose to opt into the county landlord licensing requirements, which is a specific issue that is holding up the resident. So hopefully that gives you a taste of it. We didn't want to get too far into the discussion tonight, but at least we didn't want you caught off guard if this comes up at your October meeting.
One question I would have is what would prevent people from breaking up Victorians into multi apartments or other such things?
Right. That was an issue. It's a good question, Phil. It's an issue I discussed with the county attorney after Stephen and I were having our conversation after the August 31st meeting. There's some nuances to it, so I might actually just send you all some information, but currently you can have non-related people living in a household. That's not uncommon. There's a definition of household in the county zoning ordinance. So that probably is allowed, but right now under the current zoning in Garrett Park, you can only have one accessory dwelling unit per property. So that would probably address some of the issue you raised. Just as a reminder, though, there has been a lot of focus at the county council level about increasing affordable housing opportunities. So no one knows exactly where that's going. So while we currently, under our current zoning, there can only be one ADU per property, there is no guarantee that that's what it's going to continue to be down the road. That's just something I think we're going to have to track and see what the county is doing legislatively. I'm sure if that were to happen, there'll be, we will not probably be the only jurisdiction that has some concerns about that. But this is all part of a lot of discussion at the county council that we'll just need to watch since we don't have zoning authority.
I joined a bunch of calls, I guess it was last year, about the planning for Thrive,
Right.
Thrive 2050, and that was a big topic of discussion. And that is the county is really kind of pushing it and not really happy about getting any dissent on it. The idea of increasing density around any kind of transit and railroad stop, I think as much as within a mile of a transit stop was bandied about, that R60 and R90 zoning, they might allow duplexes, triplexes, and quadruplexes. And I'm not sure totally what that entails for existing homes. I think it's more geared and intended towards, like, if you built a new development, you might be able to build 4 units in one kind of large structure on one formerly single family lot. But I think that's one of the things, talked about that a little bit with Barb and with George Martin. We had to look and see how that handles or how that's handled for existing houses.
Can I ask a question? Is there anything that we can do as the town council now to let this family have a granny flat for their in-laws that they're trying to have in Garrett Park? I mean, what is the holdup and what can we do to help them get that approved so they can move on with their project?
The specific holdup, Lisa, is the fact that the town opted out of Chapter 29, which is the county landlord licensing. That is the specific issue. Certainly, I think, you would want to have some discussion about what that, means. Stephen, George Martin, and I had this discussion. Garrett Park is, very different than, my time in Tacoma Park, which 50% of their housing is rental, obviously. But, my personal feeling, which doesn't mean it's necessarily yours, is that there are some benefits to having rental properties licensed and inspected by the county. Though I think certainly we need to be cognizant of the fact that that means that there's a license fee involved and properties are inspected. I don't think some of the same issues I saw in Tacoma Park would be existing in Garrett Park. But certainly I think, in my opinion, should be a governmental interest in making sure that rental properties are properly maintained and meet certain life safety codes. But ultimately, that's a policy issue for you all to determine. But as I shared with the resident and after talking to the town attorney, that is the specific action that you could take to allow this resident to move forward, because they are currently sort of stuck in the county process.
Curious if it might be the kind of thing where we end up assuming it's not a no vote to opt back into that county code. We'd be back into it before this project potentially would be done anyway. So maybe moot, it would be new construction and or in progress. I was curious, is the town at risk in any other way, other than like a delay on choosing to opt back in?
Yeah, so when I spoke to the resident about their desired timing, my understanding is that they have some time before they were planning to move in their relative. But certainly they still have, permitting to get through. And I think, Lisa, you've been through that many, many times. Probably a simpler project than what you were bringing forward, but, there does need to be some time. So my guidance to the resident, to the extent they felt comfortable doing so, is before they altered their building plans, that they give us a chance to really bring this issue forward for you all to have the opportunity to talk about it. And then depending on, what your inclination is, the family could then decide how they wanted to proceed and how whatever you're going to do works with their timing.
So that'll be at the next town council meeting in a month.
Right. I think, as I said, the accessory building regulations that Stephen is talking about with the Land Use Advisory Committee is somewhat a separate issue, but I think it's still something that has merit. My thought would be to bring forward, just to kind of do a primer, and I can certainly send you some information in the interim about what's involved if we were to opt into Chapter 29, what that would mean for people who do rent properties. I'll go ahead and plan on sending you all a link tomorrow, and we'll try to see if maybe we can get some information out a little bit further ahead of your October meeting, so people in the community have a chance to also understand what might be discussed.
Thank you.
Town attorney was certain that we would not be at risk on Airbnb. I think too, right? I think you're.
Yes, I think, Stephen, you had asked me to confirm that, and I did. Under current conditions, I did circle back around with Ron Bolt. The chapter of the county code that governs short-term rentals, such as Airbnbs, is a different section of the county code. And during Jean's swearing-in tenure, a letter was sent to the county opting out of that specific chapter.
Okay.
All right, I'd like to keep moving on. We've got, the time is 9:39. Councilmember Schultz. Updates from you about the work you've been doing?
So with regard to POSCO, basically we've received all the topographical surveys and reports and so forth, and environmental assessments. And as Barb had mentioned previously, we are set up now to be able to work on the demolition and try and get a contractor bid for demolition. First thing, obviously, is to empty the house, and something's being set up for that. We've got some money from the family to do that, so I think we'll be in good shape there. We're also looking at another donation, which is the grotto property. There's a property that has the old grotto, and it was a town pavilion at one point on the back. It's owned by some residents who decided to generously donate it to the town. So committee is investigating that and what needs to be done there. And then also looking at other things like we'll call it dog park next to the swimming pool and so forth. Right now, the principal things are going to be looking at the grotto. I would say we'll be looking at the grotto, looking at the Yandell property to get things moving as far as that goes. And as far as the sewers, storm sewers, I should say, we met with the county. We met with a number of people from the county, including their highway administration and their environmental people and the sewer people, and they gave us a presentation. So now we're studying it, and we should have some more news in the future, but nothing more right now. Thanks.
Thank you. Barb, manager's financial report and my manager's report, please.
Sure. Oops. Let me just find my place here. So On the financial side of things, included in your agenda packet is the final financial report for FY 2022, as well as the monthly reports for July and August. As you may recall, back in July, I presented a preliminary financial report year-end for FY 2022. Very few differences from what you saw originally. As I communicated by email, there were a few accounts that at the higher account level had exceeded the budgeted amount. Those were outlined in the information I sent to you all under separate cover, and funds were moved from contingency to bring those accounts into line. Those are very minimal changes. So what you saw in July is essentially what you're seeing this evening. Not much to really report this early in a fiscal year for July or August. As Donna mentioned, we did receive the second tranche of ARPA funding. In the month of August. It was minimally more than what we received in FY 2022. That was because of some non-entitlement unit in Maryland didn't do what it was supposed to do. So they redistributed those funds to other NEUs in the state. In talking to Mary Retke, our accountant, you might have noticed in the financial reports that we didn't include a sheet for ARPA while you all are determining how you want to spend the funds. There's really not much point in giving you a sheet because it has no line items that are budgeted on the expenditure side. So we basically are showing the ARPA funding, as reserved in your reserve summary. Phil, did you have a question?
Yes. Two questions you may not get in there yet, but one question concerned the invasive vine removal pilot project and the cost of that. And the second one recently to see if it's if we still need to keep that much money or if we should reduce it some.
I'm sorry, Phil, which line item are you talking about, whether it can be reduced?
It's called the employee leave reserve. It's part of the reserve.
Oh, yeah.
On the last page.
Let me explain about that. So the employee leave reserve is essentially something that is required under governmental accounting standards. So that amount will be reviewed in conjunction with the FY 2022 audit. They will look at what the employee leave balances were that are actually paid out in our potential liabilities. So we do need that. That amount may be adjusted though after the audit is finished. In terms of your question.
Yeah, I was actually part of.
I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was sorry. I was part of the. I was actually part of the group that did that, and
Okay.
one of the things that we had wanted to make sure we had sufficient quantity of money, but I don't think it had been reviewed in a while, and that was the only suggestion on that one.
Yeah, it should be reviewed every year, but I'll confirm that with Mary and get back to you all. In terms of the invasive vine removal project, Phil, you indicated you had some interest in that, and I imagine Jared Lee does as well. Phil Normandy and I had solicited proposals from 3 companies. We did review those, and I've signed a contract with Residential Reforestation LLC. They will be doing a series of treatments scheduled to begin with knotweed treatment in September, and then 2 subsequent treatments that will basically also occur in the September to November timeframe. So I don't have the exact date of when they will be starting work, but it should be later this month or into early October. So this pilot project was spearheaded by Adam Darkins of the Arboretum Committee. So I did want to use this opportunity to give Adam a shout out for his work on this.
That's great. Thank you, Barb. Thank you for asking, Phil. Barb, those locations for that which parks will that work cover?
It's in
which areas?
Cambria Park and Porcupine Woods.
Thank you.
What was the cost on that?
It was actually very nominal. I don't recall, Phil, off the top of my head, but it was actually amazingly inexpensive. I can shoot you all a copy of the contract after the meeting.
Great, thanks. Sounds like a good idea because I hate pulling those weeds and I've been pulling a lot of them.
Just moving along in the interest of time, as far as other work, kind of tree-related work, I think all of you, I'm sure, noticed the removal of the 4 large willow oaks in the 4800 block of Oxford. That work got bounced around a lot as we were trying to navigate working with the nursery school and the elementary school and the daycare center. All of whom were amazingly understanding of kind of the impact. Also want to thank Holy Cross for allowing people to park in their parking lot while this was going on. So that work is essentially done. There is still some remedial stump grinding work that needs to be done. Town Arborist for Normandy also recently compiled a list of trees for our next round of pruning. And deadwood removal, and also kind of elevating trees above the street. We have contracted with Bartlett tree experts for that pruning, deadwood removal, and elevation work. We're basically in the queue for Bartlett to do that work. I anticipate it should probably be done sometime in the next 6 weeks. As soon as I have a firm date, we'll obviously send something out to you all as well as the community. During that process, Phil Normandy also identified 10 trees for removal. We've contracted with Empire Landscape to perform the removals. I don't have a firm date for that yet, but once again, I'll be happy to share that with you once we know we're moving forward with Empire's schedule. So I think that's it kind of on tree or arboretum work. Just to kind of tag on briefly with the comments that Phil made about Yandell. We have contracted with the company that does our regular trash pickup. Part of their side business is clearing out homes. And after a couple other failed attempts to get a contract I was comfortable with, we're going with them. The work tentatively has been scheduled to begin on Thursday. I believe it's September 29th. I don't have a calendar in front of me, but that's the date that's in my head. And will likely take a minimum of 3 days, possibly bleeding into a 4th. So I'm going to be doing a walkthrough with the head of the company. He wants to sort of have a logistical plan to tackle it because there is quite a bit of stuff. Once that's nailed down and we get a little closer and I confirm the dates, I will be sending notifications to those residing immediately around the site. Because it's going to last for a couple of days and it is going to be noisy. What they will be doing is, backing up trash compactor trucks. We have worked with Phil Normandy to make sure we know where they can and cannot park so that no trees are negatively impacted. But basically that is going to be the quickest way. It's just for them to load directly into compactor trucks, and basically there will just be a steady series of trucks going to and from the site and the transfer station. So it's not going to be the most pleasant couple days for the immediate neighbors, but hopefully they can keep in mind that it's kind of a first step to a more positive property next to theirs. So I think that's it, unless anybody has any questions.
Have we found a home for the piano?
Have not, Phil. Basically, we did have someone look at it, as you know, but I think because the property is not weather tight, there's actually mildew on the piano. So I don't think it's suitable for donation. I will certainly make one more effort to see if someone can use it, but I think it's just not in very good condition because of all the roof leaks that have occurred.
Steve?
Just a quick question. If things are taken away from the Yandell property, would it help to open up that gate temporarily so the trucks could go through one way and not have to back down there and potentially hit cars or have the beeping up, the backing up noise all day?
You know what, I can certainly maybe talk to the adjacent neighbors about that and kind of get their thoughts. It is I will say taking my car, which is not even particularly big down there, and sometimes having to back up, it's not the most comfortable thing. I can't even possibly imagine having a large compactor trash truck, but obviously they do that now. But let me ask about that, Stephen, and when I do the walkthrough with the hauler and see if that would make things a little easier for them.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Okay. With that, time is 9:51 and we're ready to adjourn.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.